Welcome to day 21 of our daily Bible reading. We have finished the book of Genesis and we'll be moving into Exodus chapter 1 and 2, and we will be looking at Psalm 88 and Luke 21. Exodus begins with an interesting story that focuses on women. This is the birth story, the origin story of the prophet Moses. And a couple of the women who show up first here are some midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. Now, first of all, I think it's great that midwives get a named prominent role in this story. They have been asked to kill baby boys by the Pharaoh of Egypt because the Israelites are very prolific. They're having tons of kids. And there are so many Israelites now that the Egyptians are worried that the Israelites are going to have too much power and perhaps rise up against them. Now, the midwives are presented as honoring God by letting the baby boys live. They are sneaky with Pharaoh. Frankly, they lie to Pharaoh, but they do it in order to honor God. Now, one of the interesting things in the Jewish tradition here is that depending on how you translate the Hebrew, the midwives are presented either as Hebrew midwives or midwives to the Hebrews. If they are midwives to the Hebrews, this means they are not Hebrew. They are Egyptian or some other ethnicity, and they are serving the Israelite people with their midwifery skills. There are many in the Jewish tradition who lift up these midwives as righteous Gentiles, and there's a long tradition in the Jewish faith of honoring the people who are not of the Jewish traditions, but who have done things to serve the Jewish people. And so these two midwives are some of the earliest righteous Gentiles that are lifted up for the way that they have served the Jewish people. Now, as we are growing here, when we're talking about the growth of the Israelite people, this is really a transition time where we are seeing the growth from a family unit of the family of Jacob to now the nation of Israel. Jacob, well, starting back with Abraham, he's been told that he's going to have so many children that it will be nations and it will be as many as the stars in the skies. But now with the death of Jacob and this transition time now towards the time of Moses, we are really starting to see the numbers that had been promised to Abraham. And we are now talking about a nation of people and not just a family. Moses is the son of a Levite. So the Levites were the priestly class. They were descended from Levi, who's one of the sons who had made bad choices, and they are not going to get land when they move into the promised land. But they have been set aside to serve as priests. And so that is the branch of Jacob's family tree that Moses is being born into. The Nile River plays an interesting role here. Now, the Nile River is absolutely critical and central to the life of Egypt, and everything in Egypt revolves around the Nile. Much of their civilization was developed in order to learn to tame the Nile, to manage its floods so that they could be a prosperous nation, raising a lot of food in the desert along the Nile. So the Nile is central here. In this story, Moses is saved by the Nile River. He's put into a basket. He's separated from the Egyptians who are trying to kill all the baby Israelite boys. And it is kind of the beginning of a story that is going to end with the death of Pharaoh in the Nile River. After the Israelites escape from Egypt, Pharaoh and his army chase them, and Pharaoh ends up dying in the Nile. So there's an interesting piece here where the Nile saves the life of Moses, but then takes the life of Pharaoh. Just to complete the beginning part of launching Moses here, the most interesting thing about Moses' birth story is that everyone who's a part of this story is a woman. This is highly unusual. Women are in power in the birth story. Moses' mother takes action to save Moses. Moses' sister is the one who's along the river watching over Moses. Pharaoh's daughter comes and saves the child, and of course the midwives have been there. The other interesting thing about all of this is that Moses is not the firstborn. He clearly already has a sister, and Aaron, his brother, is older and is already hanging around. So Moses is not a firstborn child. Jacob was not a firstborn. We are going to see David later on is not a firstborn. God is not interested in birth order status. God is interested in your heart, in your beliefs, in your loyalty, in your commitment, in your love, in your grace. We still to this day have a bias towards firstborn children. We still have a lot of people around the world who give greater deference to firstborn, and we still even have systems where the firstborn gets more stuff, gets more honor, gets more rights, gets titles, especially when you look at the countries that have an aristocratic system still in place, like the United Kingdom. Take, for example, King Charles and Prince William and Prince George. God is saying firstborn status is not what matters. And I think, again, we are challenged to look at the bias we had. We talked about our bias against short people when we talked about Zacchaeus previously. Here, what is still set up to give preference to firstborn in our world today? I think we need to keep turning our gaze to ourselves and saying, let us look to people's hearts, to people's behavior, and let us interact with people based on what they have done instead of how they were born. Psalm 88 is a psalm that is seeking help from God once again, but God doesn't seem to hear. It's a pretty miserable description of life. It could be that the person is dealing with an illness. In this time period, there was a sense that illnesses or sickness was caused by sin. So anyone who is ill is going to be separated from the community because the other people don't want to catch the sin. They don't want the sin to be contagious, and clearly these people have done something wrong and that's why they're sick, so we're going to stay away from them. This is something for us to remember today, is that this is an area where we've made huge changes, where we are far more compassionate towards people who are suffering from an illness. I think it's really interesting that the psalm ends with this idea, this concept that, hey, God, take care of me. Do something good for me. Listen to me, because dead people can't praise you. If you want people praising you, if you want to be in relationship with us, you got to keep us alive. And so it is an interesting way of thinking about life and death. Once I'm dead, it's all over. There's nothing happening. Now, this is something that goes back and forth. There's a lot of the Hebrew Bible that there really isn't life after death. The Sadducees in the New Testament don't believe there's a resurrection after death. So the whole heaven and hell thing is not a completely well-developed thing, and there's a variety of different theologies on that. But this psalmist is saying, keep me alive if you want me to be praising your name, because once I'm dead, it's all over. As we turn to Luke 21, we have Jesus doing some teaching about offerings. Now, bringing offerings to the temple is a long Jewish tradition. All of the religions of this time had some sort of structure for sacrifices, for offerings, for bringing something to the God. And for the Jewish people, it revolved around the tithe. You were to bring 10% of your harvest, your crops, your income to the temple for God's work in the community. What Jesus is really lifting up here is not so much a really rigid legalistic structure of, how to count your 10%. Rather, he is saying, are we making offerings that we won't miss? Are we making offerings that are easy to offer, that are not sacrificial for ourselves? The widow is giving from her scarcity, not from her abundance. She's making a sacrifice, a true sacrifice. It is going to hurt. She's going to notice that she has given something to God that she no longer has. She is going to have to live more modestly because of what she has given to God. And I think what Jesus is trying to get at here is that maybe the sacrifices we give to God are supposed to cost us something. It is supposed to change us. We are supposed to be different because of what we have given to God. We'll see you next time. Have a super day.